Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the ATC Network Programming. This is a special show we're doing, and today we're going to be highlighting the Beachcomber, and more importantly, we're going to be highlighting the Beachcomber's family program, and that's why we have friends of mine and just fantastic people who work the family program over at the Beachcomber, Dr. Tony Foster and Dr. KJ Foster, and yes, they are a married couple. It's not just a coincidence, right?
Right.
So, let's start with nuts and bolts. You guys, how long have you been with the Beachcomber? Tell me a little bit about how you kind of ended up with the Beachcomber and what it means,
It starts with, I got sober there 18 years ago. And when I got sober there, I realized that I could never go back into my old industry, which was restaurant chains. I knew that if I went back to restaurant chains, I would drink again. And so I took a couple of years to decide what I wanted to do with my life, and I thought I might make a good therapist. So I went back to school and then became an intern at the Beachcomber, and then became a therapist, and then ultimately opened up an IOP and a PHP Beachcomber units, both of which are very successful and now been open almost 10 years. Actually left for a couple of years, and KJ and I came back specifically to run the family program almost 3 years ago now.
Wow. And
how I ended up there is because Tony and I met each other through our participation in a recovery program. And so we met in recovery, and I decided that I wanted to change careers as the result of my recovery. I had already had a master's degree in mental health, but I hadn't pursued that avenue. I was working in the hospitality industry for many, many years, and Tony was the one that encouraged me to go ahead and take that leap of faith and to go back to school and update my education. And he's the one that encouraged me to come to the Beachcomber. Joe Bryan gave me my very first job as an intern at the Beachcomber, and I think my first group was on spirituality when someone called in sick and they needed someone to come in. And then from there is when I started working almost immediately as a part of the family program. Because of my experience, I'm not only someone who has recovered from addiction myself, but I also have a son who has recovered from drug addiction. So Joe knew of that experience and right away kind of tapped me to be a part of the family program.
that's excellent. And I want to talk a lot about the family program, but just very quickly, the Beachcomber, I spend a lot of time up there myself, and one of the reasons I do is because I believe it is very authentic. It is a great program. So overall, and Tony, I know you're a director there, and you bring this great program there with the family stuff. What is it that you think makes the Beachcomber as special as it is? And by the way, we just celebrated 45 years of existence.
Yeah.
That's unheard of in treatment industry.
It's the oldest continuous treatment center in the state of Florida. And I think it's important to note that the name of the Beachcomber is not just the Beachcomber, it's the Beachcomber Family Center.
Okay.
For addiction and alcoholism. So I think what makes it different is several things. First of all, it's family, always been the same family owned. The founder ran it. The current owner is his son, who came to work part-time 40 years ago and never left. He was in college, he came over the summer and never left. He's been running it ever since. They have a perspective of having therapists who are in recovery. Every therapist at the Beachcomber is in recovery currently. That's not always been the case, but to my knowledge, there's only been 3 therapists in 45 years that weren't in recovery. So the clients get to relate much easier that way. But there are 5 full-time therapists for a total of 16 patients. So the ratio of patients to therapists is low, and you get a tremendous amount of one-on-one. We're required to do one individual session a week. Each client probably gets 3 or 4, although officially they get 1. But they can also get individual sessions even with a therapist who's not their primary therapist anytime they want. So it's very much hands-on. I choked there for a second. Very much hands-on, very much done with love.
Yeah.
Okay, there's no, we never put someone on the spot, so to speak, in the middle of the group and berate them or, we're not, none of that at all. We completely shun that. Our family program is the same way. When we first started doing the family program, we had some family members who had been to other treatments where they were embarrassed in a group because they talked about what kind of parents they were, and that we don't do anything like that. It's all done with love, and it's all done with teaching the clients how to live once they leave the Beachcomber, because they can have a great 28 days at the Beachcomber. If they don't put that to use when they leave, they just had a month vacation, right? So we teach them skills that help them to stay sober every day.
And then what I teach them relative to the family aspect is focusing on ways in which the family members themselves can change. So I highlight from the very beginning to the family members and help them to come to a level of understanding and acceptance that they too are in recovery and that they are a very important part of that recovery process, because we can and we do, like Tony said, give them all of the skills and the tools and the information that they need in order to be successful when they leave treatment, because treatment is treatment. It's not recovery. It takes a long time to fully recover from a substance use disorder. On average, about 18 months to 2 years of consistent, rehabilitation. And so as a part of that, they'll leave treatment, and if they go into a family system where no one else in the family has experienced any kind of recovery and no one in the family has changed in any way, then their risk for relapse, the likelihood that they will relapse is very, very high. So I work with the families to identify ways in which they can start to not only they can start to change, gain awarenesses on where maybe their behavior is possibly contributing to relapse, but how they can change in order to better support a successful recovery rather than relapse. And sometimes it just is a very small change in the way in which they're responding to their loved one, because I've learned through my own experience and through research that I've conducted that shaming our loved ones, we think that we're doing the right thing to try and encourage them to get help that they need, but shame actually feeds, makes the addiction stronger. And so learning how to approach their loved one with compassion, and also this is really key too, is learning how to be compassionate towards themselves, because as family members sometimes we're so caught up in the guilt and the shame of the way in which, maybe thinking in terms of how we have possibly contributed, that can be really difficult to deal with. And let's face it, when we have a loved one who's addicted, it's very, very painful, and there's a lot of suffering on both sides. So learning how you can be kinder and gentler and more accepting of yourself is huge.
That's why I'm so excited about this, because there's a lot of places. In fact, I think probably 99% of rehabs out there will say, we've got a family program. But then they've got 150 clients, and I'm thinking, how can they really focus on family? So it must be exciting for you to have a small population where you can really, really do that.
Yeah, and we provide, not only do we do webinars twice a week. They used to be live. I think we're going back to live
June 1st.
Pretty soon. So as a part of the family program, we do live presentations of key educational information that the family members need to know about, like, some myths, post-acute withdrawals, shame, communication, all those topics that are really essential for the family members. And then we also, when we do it live, we'll conduct a family group that's just the family members to help them address certain issues. And then we do family sessions. So for some clients, it might be contraindicated, meaning that it may not be good for their recovery process, at least initially, to have the family be a part of it in terms of having a family meeting with everyone, because sometimes the families are that individual's biggest trigger for relapse. That can be the case. So depending upon the circumstances of the family, we may meet with the client and the family members together, or we may just meet with the family members and talk to them about resources and ways in which they can, start to help themselves.
It's funny because with the COVID crisis and the quarantines and all the other problems we've had to adopt more of an online personality in all business,
Right.
but especially with what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So
For us,
you're saying you're going back to doing some live,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
but you're going to keep some of that. Do you think
Oh,
that's something that you
absolutely.
found has been beneficial?
The best thing that ever happened to our family program was
Mm-hmm.
COVID.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why, right?
It's true.
We have 16 patients. Let's say we're full. Let's say 8 of them are local. So only 8 families can come because they're local. Well, during COVID, we've been able to address all 16. So what we're going to do is do it concurrently, live and webinar.
Via Zoom. Mm-hmm.
Via Zoom, so that people that are in Portland, Oregon can still participate in the webinar. They just won't participate in the individual session or the group meeting that happens after the webinar. But they're still going to get the educational part. And I want to really stress how important the educational part is, because the families walk in the first time, not literally walk in, come into the meeting the first time, thinking that they're just going to hear some information. We give them very in-depth, that the people have never heard of things like post-acute withdrawal, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't have any idea how important spirituality is to long-term recovery. They don't know things like how to communicate properly. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse regarding communication. And every single time we do it, we have people say, family members say, I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea what I was doing to contribute to this.
Mm-hmm.
And that yes, Bobby, you learned a lot, but I learned a lot too, as a family member. And that, I really enjoy hearing that, because that tells me we're really getting to them, because our whole focus of the family program is that the family members are in recovery too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they're almost facing a tougher hill to climb in a certain way, the family members, because with the person who is suffering from the addiction or the affliction, they've got to focus on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the family member has a little bit of, they've got to focus on themselves as well, but they've also got to look at their part. They've got to think about, what can I do to contribute to their recovery? How can I set up a safe home? There's so many things.
But all
and
of
most
it,
of them don't think about that, do
right,
they?
right.
Some of them are, what do I need to step away from that I keep? My
It's
codependency is
everything.
causing me to.
How do I stop being an enabler,
Exactly.
but still be loving? How do I do that?
Right.
I think most normal people would know how to do that.
Well, and it starts with, so much of it is about learning how to stop hyper focusing on your loved one,
Right.
and bring the focus back to yourself and take care of yourself and put the oxygen mask on yourself before you even attempt to try and help your loved one, because so many people also don't understand codependency, and that's another topic that we go over, because people have a tendency to think in terms that they get stuck on the dependency part of the word, and what they don't understand is that the codependency develops because they are consumed with or focusing on their loved one and trying to help their loved one in a way where they are then not taking care of themselves. They're putting their own needs and everything about their own life on the back burner, and just because they're afraid, right? That's I did that. You're so afraid of what's happening with your loved one, and the potential for them to die, quite frankly, that you get consumed with it and by it. So a part of the process is teaching the loved ones, the family members, how to start putting that focus on themselves with the self-compassion and being compassionate towards themselves, learning how to put the oxygen mask on themselves so that whatever happens with their loved one, they're in a better place, of strength and resilience to be able to handle the situation. And so it's all about everybody focusing on their own recovery. And I tell the family members the best thing, because family members will say to me, "What can I do, KJ?" And sometimes they don't like the answer because it involves them doing some work themselves. It
Yeah.
involves like, you know what, you need a support group yourself. You need to focus on yourself and ways in which you can change. But that's really the best support that they can give their loved one is by focusing on themselves and working their own recovery program and getting their own help and their support.
It's so much. And, I've heard said before, the families, unfortunately, they've got all of the isms, they've got
Right.
all of the addictive behaviors that the addict
Right.
has, or at least to a certain extent, but they don't even get the benefit of even getting high out of it. All they get is
Right.
the bad part.
Right.
And it can be so destructive. And I've seen families either become hyper vigilant and hyper focused or turn off completely.
Right.
And to try to find the balance in that. How important is it that a family participates in their own wellness for the client? I mean, I don't know if either of you could speak to this, but I mean, does their chance of relapse, is there a percentage it goes up? I mean, how bad is it for somebody to walk into a home with no change as opposed to going into a home with change?
Well, KJ can speak to that really well.
Oh yeah, it's huge. It can be the difference between relapse and success. And one of the things too that I just want to highlight really quick is the way in which family members respond to their loved one's relapse can make the difference between whether that family member, whether that individual who's recovering is able to get back on track very quickly or whether they maybe continue for a period of time, because this is what typically happens. The person relapses, the family member gets angry, right? And what's fueling that anger? Fear, right?
Yes,
and,
yes.
And a lot of people respond to fear by getting angry. And it's the defense mechanism, right? It's a survival instinct. But what happens when we get angry with our loved one, when we're maybe critical, see, you're not working your recovery program, you're not going to enough meetings, you're not, kind of attacking the loved one, instead of coming from an approach of, you can get back on track. Like, I'm terrified that this has happened. You can express how you feel, but in a way that's not going to shame your loved one, because substance use disorders are a chronically relapsing disorder. So to expect that your loved one's just going to go to treatment and not experience some kind of a slip up is unreasonable. It's illogical. And
Right.
yet people will say, "Oh, don't talk about relapse. Don't tell the family member that there's a possibility for relapse. We don't want to scare them." And I don't believe in that at all. I'm like, no, I tell the family members, there's a high probability that your loved one is going, especially if you don't make any changes yourself, but there's a high probability. So be prepared for that. Like, I call it a hurricane plan. Have your hurricane plan of how you're going to approach that, what's going to happen as a result of that. But then put it away, focus on your loved one being successful. But if they fall off the wagon, encourage them to get right back on, get right back into their recovery program quickly, because the way in which you respond to them can create even more of a desire to just continue drinking and or drugging, or you can actually help them to
And
get
every
back on
situation
track.
is different,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
I mean,
It does
it's
depend.
different in every way, to the degree that you have some family members who actually prefer the person still to be
Right.
using, because they can control them better that way.
Right.
We've actually had before COVID, when we were doing it live still, we actually had a family member in the middle of the group with 30 people in the room start cursing out the individual who had the problem, because he now had an opinion.
Yeah.
He wasn't allowed to have an opinion before.
Right.
And actually said in front of everybody, I liked you more when you were drinking.
Well, and that person had control of all their money. They
Yeah.
had control of everything. So.
I imagine you see that a lot with spouses because one becomes the caretaker of the other. Now their identity is defined by being the caretaker of the
Exactly.
relationship.
Exactly.
They come back and say, listen, I don't need you to do everything for me anymore. Now this person's lost their identity. And
Right.
we see people, unfortunately, we do see people, like families do split up a little bit sometimes when somebody becomes independent again.
Right.
Well, and when we in the family program, we teach people about, okay, while you've been out drinking and doing what you were doing, your spouse started paying the bills that you used to do,
Yeah.
start being the disciplinarian that you used to be. There's an adjustment when you're going to go back, and you're going to have to work with that because it doesn't just turn on and off overnight.
Well, and that identity piece too is huge, not only for the family members, but for the person who's attempting to recover. Because whether you're especially if you're a young person and your identity for your whole life practically has been being this drug addict or this alcoholic, being able to break out of that role within your family, even, you've been identified as the problem child or the black sheep or however you want to describe it. When you start to change and become healthy and become responsible, it's like there's this force within the family that's constantly trying to put you back in that box, put you back in that role by the way in which you're responded to, by the way things happen, and it must be so-and-so's fault because they're always the one that messes up. It's very hard to break out of that identity.
And sometimes the identity of the other kids in the house has become, I'm the good one.
Yeah.
And when the other one starts becoming a good one, they struggle.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I'm the hero, you're the screw up. We
Right.
don't change roles.
Right.
Exactly.
Don't infringe upon my role.
Yeah. And I tell clients all the time, and I know this is probably part of what you're doing too, is teaching clients, when you go home, you got to give them space to heal too. Especially, I guess it happens with everything. You got parents, and they want their kids to just automatically trust them and love them, and feel like, oh, daddy's different now, or mommy's okay now. They're not going to trust for a long time. It might take a long time, but that's their recovery, and you can't force it. You can't step off the plane and say, I did my 30 days, my life has changed.
Done.
Now everybody's got to treat me different.
Right.
So is that part of what you're working with
Yeah,
too?
absolutely.
Is preparing them to allow for their family's recovery?
Well, I think that a big part for both the individual and the family member is the understanding, acceptance of the fact that this is a long rehabilitation process. So like you just said, whether it's the individual themselves or the family member, some people think, I went to my 28-day treatment. I went to treatment for 28 days, I'm done, I'm good. And they'll expect, or their family member will expect them to jump right back into life, go back to school, jump into that stressful full-time job that's a part of the problem that's driving the drinking or the drugging, expect them to go right back into their responsibilities with their children. And that you
or never be depressed and never be sad and never be anxious because all of a sudden, oh my God, it's awful, right?
Right, exactly.
This is one of the areas where the beachcomber being so small is helpful, because having 5 therapists for 16 patients, we have much more in-depth conversations. It's not checking off boxes, it's real therapy. So you're spending more time individually with the client. You can talk about much more their adjustment. That last week that they're doing their aftercare plan and really talking about what they're going to have to go through when they get out.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times I've gone there because I like to go and teach and help. But I've seen clients who are like, I talked to my family last night. I'm a little torqued up today. I'm like, did you talk to him? I talked to like 4 people. I mean, and they'll meet therapists, even if it's not their therapist. Some they'll stop. And I love the Beachcomber, that kind of atmosphere of, you're not sitting in an office staring at my degrees and I'm behind a desk and you're here. You guys are sitting at picnic tables and sitting out outside or walking down by the beach. Is that really important for this kind of treatment, for this kind of recovery, is to not have those kind of like traditional barriers.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
here's what happens, right? Let's say the three of us are therapists at the Beachcomber.
Yeah.
And my client is struggling, and I'm not there that day. And you see that my client is struggling, and you walk down to the beach with them, right? And you find out through that walk down to the beach with them what's really going on. What they had a fight with their girlfriend on the phone last night, or they got a homework assignment that they don't understand, but they don't want to ask questions, or whatever it might be. You can then come back and tell me as the therapist, and I can work with them, or you can work with them depending on the circumstances. So those casual type of contacts help a tremendous amount. We expect our therapists to be out amongst the crowd, right? It's not just about being in the meeting room and lecturing or teaching or whatever. It's also about being very personal and a lot of one-on-ones, and that all happens on the grounds or at the beach.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. And again, I've also been a part of, watching where somebody has this particular problem that maybe we didn't realize this was a problem. And one of the other therapists say, well, I kind of like work with that a lot. So they'll say, okay, would you mind stepping in and helping with this?
Sure.
It's not like, well, that's my client. You don't talk to my client. You don't do this. You guys, whatever works is the best path for recovery. You guys work it.
Right.
Well, and what happens sometimes too, and this just happened recently, is that depending upon when the therapist is there, what days, because this one client spent time with another therapist, walking down to the beach, sharing things that were going on, that client developed, because they shared these vulnerabilities with this therapist, the client felt this connection.
Yeah.
And came back and said to Tony, you know what, I really had this moment with this therapist and I feel really connected to them. Would it be possible for me to, change and work with them? And of course, we always have to be careful of the client that's just doing that to manipulate, to manipulate and, trying to really get out of doing certain things, because maybe a therapist is confronting them in a way that they don't like. But
there are real things.
There are real things.
You don't like everybody.
Right,
Some people I walk up to and I talk to and I'm just like, I'm not feeling it.
Right.
It's the real world.
Right.
That's the beauty of the situation, right? The 5 therapists have 5 completely different approaches, right?
Yes.
So none of them are like each other. So you can go from one to the other. And in the situation that KJ is talking about, we talked about it in a staff meeting with that person's initial therapist. And she actually was the one that brought it to us and said, it might be better if we switch. And so we did.
And it used to be at the Beachcomber, and it's like, I'm not saying this to like open a can of worms, but it we could talk about this for an hour in and of itself. But it used to be at the Beachcomber for years that as a part of your process, and it was this way when Tony was a client there, and when I first started there, is that you would rotate. So nobody was really like assigned to a client as the therapist. It was like all the therapists were considered to be like working with everybody, and there was this rotation system where every week you would meet with a different therapist so that you could get a different perspective and different feedback, and for some people it didn't work, but for the majority of people it worked really well. And because of the insurance companies, and they demand
The way you have to report things,
the way
it's
that
got
you
to
have
go a
to,
certain way.
right? So what they had to just recently, within the last couple of years, they had to change that, and now each person has to be assigned to a particular person, and the documentation has to be a certain.
But you don't
way,
limit
so.
the access if
Right,
they want to
exactly.
talk to somebody.
Absolutely.
And that's so important. And especially if you have a real family program, like with what you're talking about, like unlike just the verbiage, I got a family program. We call them once a week and talk for 3 minutes and that's it,
Right.
When you got a real family program, you're bringing a lot of issues in that other treatment centers aren't welcoming those issues. They're not welcoming all the drama you're going to have with kids and parents and with husband and wife and mothers and fathers. You're not, but you guys are like, bring that all in. And so the all hands on deck approach with the small clientele, that's fantastic.
And we give out our cell phone numbers too.
Oh, wow.
As the program director, every family member has my cell phone number.
Right.
Okay. But as a therapist, I specifically talk to the family members both with the client and without them every week. So I'm getting information sometimes that the client doesn't realize I'm getting. And then we can have the conversation together, and that resolves a lot of issues that way.
Now I'm going to bring up something that's, since you are so ensconced with family and stuff, a lot of times with addiction, there could also be, it's not always, but there could also be some abuse issues. Whether it's abuse of the client themselves or maybe the client has been abusive and things like that. Those are really heavy issues to get involved in. But, what do you feel the responsibility is once those issues come up? I mean, how do you deal with them there? I know each one's a little bit different, but you don't shy away. You don't turn that off, do you?
No, I mean, and again, this depends upon the situation, and so whether it's the client that is experiencing that abuse, there's like protocols that are in place in terms of dealing with that, and that's where it would definitely be not it would be contraindicated. It wouldn't be healthy for the client to have their family member involved if their boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever that abusive situation is. Then the client has the ability to say, I don't want any contact with that person. And then we have to approach that with the client. Okay, how are you going to set boundaries? How what are you going to do when you leave that's going to put you in a position where you're going to be safe and you're going to be in a place that's going to be conducive to your recovery. And when it's the other way around, it's similar, but yet sometimes our hands get tied when the client does sign a that they won't release consent, or we don't have the ability to talk with their loved one or work with their loved one, then that can be a little difficult. That really
Sure. And to talk about the therapy for the abuse for a second, because I think that's important to talk about too. We have a couple of therapists that specialize in trauma work, because in substance abuse, trauma is such a huge percentage. Numbers that are mind-boggling that the general public doesn't know about, like in the 90 percentiles for women and in the 70 percentiles for men that have had major traumas in their life.
Yeah.
So that gets processed through rapid resolution therapy. Right now we have 2 of our 5 therapists do that. And so if somebody's been abused by a family member, we go through an assessment. Based on that assessment, we then assign that person to one of those 2 therapists, and they do the work, and it's been pretty successful.
I think I was bringing the point up because without that kind of contact that you guys have with the families, you may not be able to identify that these are dangerous situations. But now that they're identified, even though you might not be able to do the therapeutic work you want with the family member or with even with the client if they want to shut down from, but at least you could identify this is probably not the path that's right for the client to go back into that situation. Right. And if you didn't really have those connections with the family, you might never recognize those things. Right. So how many treatment centers are sending clients unknowingly into bad situations? You're never going to know everything, but at least you have a shot at identifying what's a good, healthy situation for a client and what's not.
Right. Sorry. Well, I have somebody that I know who has a loved one who's in treatment in New Jersey, and I've been talking to her about the situation, and I said to her, the way in which you're going to know if this is a good treatment center that your loved one is in is if they reach out to you, he signed consent and all that. If they reach out to you and they want your perspective and they ask you for information about how you feel and what your experience has been, because that's a key piece. Yeah. There are so many times where we work with the client and they're telling us one story about, their use, right? Yeah. Whether it's minimizing or completely fabricated. And then you talk to the loved one and not only might you get a totally different story than what you're hearing from the loved one, but you may also just get additional information that the loved one just hasn't thought of sharing with you, or maybe isn't, open to sharing it. It just provides a different perspective on the situation that can be really, really helpful
And that's
in working with the
particularly-
client.
That's particularly true of traumatic issues.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we get this information in the first couple of days of treatment, and the client may not yet trust us enough to tell us about traumatic situations.
Right.
Where you call up the family member will tell you in a minute.
Right.
Because that's one of the things they do recognize, that if there is a trauma, that it might be a key problem here that needs to be worked on.
And I find too that I can also identify how much in need that family member is in education and recovery, because sometimes you'll hear a level of hostility or a perspective of the client where in my mind it will trigger that this is a part of the problem, like this loved one's perspective on whether it's true or not. You know what I mean? It's not that it's not true, it's that there's such a degree of anger and resentment that loved one is feeling towards the client, that this is something that really needs to be addressed in order for this client to be successful in their recovery process.
Absolutely. And, I think it's just so important that people understand how important it is for families to be involved in
Right.
these kind of things. And the Beachcomber, they do it right.
Mm-hmm.
They do it right. You guys have a great team, a great staff. You have a great program. You have the right size. It's all lined up. You don't make it 45 years if you're
Right.
doing it wrong.
Right.
There's no 100% anywhere in this world, but you give them the best possible chance, I think. And that communication with the family, you got a better idea what they're walking into and how to prepare them for where they need to go. Tony, you got to be proud of being associated with this and going through it all those years ago, and now being here and being a director and all those things. How do you feel?
Well, very lucky, and I'll tell you why. The way I became involved with the Beachcomber when I became a patient was the most lucky thing in the world. I was sitting there deciding I needed to go to treatment. Literally, this is back when we had phone books. Literally, I opened the phone book, the yellow pages, and there's a display ad. I didn't turn a single page. I opened to the page. It said 100 steps to the ocean, the Beachcomber. And I'm like, how bad could that place be? It's called the Beachcomber, and it's 100 steps. That's how I had my initial impression of the Beachcomber. And, ownership at the Beachcomber are just, Joe Bryan is just a great guy. He's still very, very involved. He treats people so well. Even with 16 beds, he still finds a way to give scholarships from time to time. When one bed is financially important to a place that's only got 16 beds, he still finds a way to give scholarships. We often when someone's insurance runs out, let them stay and don't send them out, because that's what's better for them. I always say the Beachcomber makes their decisions based on what's best for the client first, what's best for the client second, and what's best for the client third. Then come the employees, then comes ownership. I've always believed that right from the beginning. I still believe it today.
I agree. And, you guys working together, I think it's so awesome. So I imagine you do everything she says, and it's...
Well, I know that when she snaps her fingers, I have to jump.
That's...
So
We're very lucky in that respect as well.
we really enjoy working
Yeah,
together.
we do.
Well, you share. Obviously, I don't know your personal relationship, although it appears good. But the passion you share.
We think very much alike. When circumstances occur that are not normal, I know how she's going to react, and she knows how I'm going to react. So she knows what I'll support. I know what she'll support, and we don't put ourselves in bad situations.
Yeah.
And another thing too is that we have a common love and appreciation for the Beachcomber. Tony, based upon the fact that he got sober there, and it's really, really special and will always be special to him. And for me, Joe was the first person to give me an opportunity in the industry. And I remember when I was interviewing, and I went to this one facility where it was I won't say what facility it was, but it was one of the types of treatment centers where they break you down to build you up. And I remember sitting there because they allowed me to observe one of their staffings and thinking to myself, is this really what you want to do, KJ? Like, this is not, it scared me, quite
Yeah.
frankly. I was like, I don't want to be involved in something like this. And then Joe Bryan gave me the opportunity to be an intern, and of course their approach is totally different than that, and really set me on the path to be where I am today. And when both of us left the Beachcomber for a short period of time, it was a really painful experience for both of us. It was really hard, and we're just really grateful and excited and blessed to be back and to be doing what we're doing.
There's so many aspects of the Beachcomber. We could spend all day talking
Yeah.
about it. But what I want to do is I want to encourage people. Here's the thing: people will spend more time researching the next car they want to buy than researching the place they're going to put their son or daughter to save their life.
Sure.
Yeah.
Don't get fooled by fancy websites. Anybody can have those. Don't get fooled by ponies and everything else. Now, it is 100 steps to the shore, and I think I actually did it in 78 because I was running, because I was happy, because it is so beautiful. But it's not about that. That's a cool thing. It's really neat, and it's nice that you can get up every morning. One of the clients said every morning they get up and they go down and they watch the sunrise at the beach.
Right.
Meditate.
And I think that's fantastic. I'm not up that early, but good for them. But if you need to talk to the people, if you're a family member, if you're looking for a place for your son or daughter, husband, wife, mother, father, whoever it might be, talk to the people. If it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right.
Right.
And if you call a place and they won't put people on the phone, if the only people you can talk to is admissions and they won't let you talk to anybody else, don't go there.
Right.
You guys are an open book, right? I mean, I think that's really important.
Yeah, just this morning, I got a call from our admissions person saying a client wants to come in, he wants to talk to a therapist, and so I got involved. So they can talk to us anytime they want.
Yeah.
Anytime they want.
The funny thing is that everybody's always trying to cover their butts, because when you're doing the things the wrong way, there's 100 different answers.
Right.
But when everybody's doing the right thing, there's only one answer. It's about the client. You said that.
Right.
So it makes it very easy. Guys, what a pleasure. If you want to know more about it, you can contact, you can get a hold of them right through the Beachcomber. The email and the phone numbers, or the website and the phone numbers right there on the screen. So just give them a call. If you want to reach out to Tony directly, you can go to tfoster@bcdelray.com. Or just go right through the Beachcomber, and you can talk to either one of them.
Either one.
If you have questions about the family program, about any of the things that they're doing there, check it out. And again, if you're looking for bells and whistles, that's all you're going to get. But if you're looking for content, if you're looking for people who care, and if you're looking for real individual care, Beachcomber's the place.
Thank you.
KJ, Tony, thank you very much. And thank you for listening. Make sure that you like us on our YouTube channel, subscribe, and hit the button so you get notifications for our next shows. I'm Scott Jones. Thanks for joining us.